Welcome back. When a brutal civil war took over Sierra Leone back in 1991, many of the children were literally caught up in the conflict. Not just as passive victims, they were forced to become child soldiers. Children as young as 11 years old were holding guns, killing anyone who crossed their path. And joining me now today is Ishmael Beer, who used to be one of those child soldiers in Sierra Leone starting at the age of what?
13.
13 at the beginning. And he's just published his memoirs of his experiences as a boy soldier, a child soldier, entitled A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier. Welcome to the program, Ishmael.
Thank you.
So when was it, how old were you when you first had a gun in your hand?
I was 13, but prior to that, I'd been running from the war from 12 to 13, and I'd lost my immediate family, was killed in the war, my mother, father, and 2 brothers, and I ended up being forcefully recruited in the war.
Recruited by whom? Who?
By the Sierra Leone army. What happened was that during the course of the war, there became disenfranchised groups of the Sierra Leone army who started to pillage the countryside and basically doing the same things that the rebels were doing.
And how many people, in the course of your time as a child soldier, how many people do you think you killed, had to kill?
Well, I'm not sure. You know, in the context of the war, I don't think there was a kind of recollection of that kind of stuff. It just became such a madness that in order for you to stay alive, each day requires somebody else to die on your behalf.
How long were you fighting as a child soldier?
I was there for over 2 years.
Over 2 years?
Yeah.
And your colleagues that you were fighting with, some of those obviously were killed by the other side.
Yes, some of my friends that I'd been running with and then ended up, being forcefully recruited with, died the first day of war. And later on, some of them died as well, and and even after we went through rehabilitation, some of them ended up going back into the army and were killed. So, but a few survived to us around it.
But you must have been terrified at that age when you saw that your colleagues were being killed, terrified that you were going to get killed, were you?
Yes, well, the first day of war is actually what was very, really terrifying, because lying there in ambush and seeing my friends that I joined with killed and their blood splattering all over me pushed something within me, and I started pulling the trigger. But after that first initial trauma of killing somebody, as time went on, it became our reality. We became desensitized to everything. We became numb. There was no ability to exhibit those human emotions, to feel pity for anyone,
Yeah, absolutely. How did it come to an end? Your war, as it were. I mean, how did you get out of it?
Well, what had happened is there was such a rampant use of children on all sides of the war that United Nations and UNICEF went in and created local rehabilitation centers, and they would go into the bushes and talk to the commanders, and they would ask them to give up a few kids at a time, and I happened to be lucky to be one of those children brought to one of the rehabilitation centers in the capital city in Freetown. And
is there more joy today in the life of Sierra Leone?
There is a joy in the sense that the war ended, and so children are not being used anymore, but there is also the problem, some problems that caused the war do persist and continue. So there are a lot of people who still need to get a hold of their lives who haven't been given that opportunity. So it is quite frustrating for them.
And what would you like to do with the rest of your life?
Well, I think, I finished my undergraduate studies, so I'm thinking of going to either graduate study or law school, because I do want to work in the human rights field and things of that sort. So, but again, I'm only 26. I don't really know what my life is going to be tomorrow or the next day. I'm open to it.
Well, I hope it's a great adventure for you and what you really want.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us, Ishmael.
Thank you for it.
Just last week, the British government lost an appeal in its fight to keep natives of the Indian Ocean Chagos Islands from returning home, more than 30 years after they were ejected, often painfully, to make room for a US Navy base on the largest island, which we hear about in the news, Diego Garcia. Joining me now is the man who put the story of the people of the Chagos Islands in the spotlight with his documentary Stealing a Nation, and in his new book, Freedom Next Time. That man is veteran filmmaker and journalist John Pilger. Welcome, John.
Thank you, David.
Now, there has been real progress, but before we come on to the progress, can you just summarise what was done to the Chagos Islanders?
It's an extraordinary story in every way. In the 60s and 70s, the British government, starting with the Wilson government, secretly expelled the population of the Chagos Islands in order to give the main island, Diego Garcia, to the Americans who wanted it as a major base in the Indian Ocean. The Chagos Islands are literally midway between Africa and India. The Americans wanted this idyllic place as a base, and the population who'd been there since the end of the 18th century were expelled to the slums of Mauritius and forgotten. And this really only came to light when the documents, the declassified files of the Foreign Office were discovered in the Public Record Office in London, and the full history of this conspiracy as it was. I mean, I've looked at some of these files, and also files under the Freedom of Information Act in the United States, where the Americans talk about instructing the British to sweep the islands and to cleanse them of the natives so that we can have this as a base. And from this base, a very important one, the Americans have attacked Iraq and Afghanistan in the last few years.
So first of all, they were expelled, ejected suddenly, not with cooperation or anything, from where their homes were on Diego Garcia. Then they went to Mauritius, and then did they spread around the world? Quite a few of them came here, didn't they?
A few of them came here, turned up literally at Gatwick Airport and demanded rights as citizens of a British colony. Now, at that point, they hadn't been given British passports, and it was Robin Cook in 2000 who made a gesture and gave them British passports. So in Crawley, in Sussex, there's a community of Chagosian people, but they're mainly in the slums of Mauritius. Some are in the Seychelles, and none at this stage are back home in the Chagos archipelago.
Now, and in terms of going home, what was the victory, last week's victory?
Well, last
Not
week's...
a total victory, but...
Well, it should be, because it's now 7 judges, High Court judges, starting in 2000. In the year 2000, the High Court said the whole thing was illegal, they should never have been expelled, and they really had the right to go home. This was backed up by a judicial inquiry last year, 2006, in which the judges described the decision to expel them and to deny them going home as repugnant, outrageous. And now, only a week or so ago, the British government, which appealed against that last decision, has lost that appeal, which means that the islanders now have the right to go home, but not to the main island where most of them come from, and that's where the American base is.
Well, that's the thing, is when I said a partial victory, because
yeah,
obviously their real homes were on Diego Garcia, and I can imagine people who were expelled from Northern Ireland being told that they can go back, but only to Wales. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it would still be a disappointment, because they're still barred from going back to their actual homes.
They are, and there's no reason for it. The Americans have said that, you know, they want the whole island as a base, but in fact the base only takes a small part of the island, and there's plenty of room for the islanders.
Yes,
but
I didn't understand that in the case. Why can't you have civilians on a military base island?
Well, that's a question to ask the US administration. During the Cold War, they saw these rather religious and harmless people who coveted their place on their paradise as rather subversive, that they might mount some liberation movement against them. which is ridiculous, of course. In fact, most of the people who want to go back are led by rather elderly women. There are about 2,000 of them now. It's a principle, it's the suffering that has gone on. I've interviewed them in Mauritius, where their children, when they got there, so disorientated were these families, that the children died, as they described it, of sadness. I heard this time and again, as if it was a disease sweeping them, that they died of being dispossessed.
And what about today? I mean, this sort of amazing thing of all done behind the scenes and secretly and so on, does that still go on today? Is the world more open, or actually more open to secrecy?
Well, yes, that's a good way of putting it. I think the world is more open to secrecy because, I mean, we think we know a great deal, but I think what we see are facades. And when you think that for over 30 years, they really got away with the lie of this, and when you read some of the Foreign Office documents, one of which is headed Maintaining the Fiction, and it coaches Foreign Office officials in how to lie to the world, that these weren't really indigenous inhabitants, they're only contract workers and so on. And you have another document which is coaching the British representative at the United Nations to lie to the world.
Well, thank you for being with us, John, and very good luck with the freedom next time. There's a lot of unfinished business in here. Thank you very much. John Pilger. Well, that's about it for this week. Join us in 7 days' time for another Frost Over the World, when, among other things, I'll be talking to Brazil's President Lula and to that amazing mountaineer, Chris Bonington. Hope you'll join me then. Until then, goodbye for now.